Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Tuesday, July 9th, 2024. I am John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. Abe Greenwald is out this week. With me, as always, Washington commentary columnist Matthew Continetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
Senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
And media commentary columnist Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John.
So I have been advocating for the idea that Joe Biden will not get out of the race, no way, no how. However, the news break that somebody leaked to the New York Times that Joe Biden has been visited by a doctor who specializes in Parkinson's either 8 or 10 times this year, I think puts a hitch in my get along. Because I do think that if it turns out that he has Parkinson's and we have not been told that he has Parkinson's, this is really, not only is this not survivable, but we now have this 100-year history. This will be the third time, at least in the course of the modern presidency, that efforts were made by a conspiracy inside the White House led by the president's wife to hide a condition that is incapacitating from the American people. First was Edith Wilson in 1919. Second was JFK, who had Addison's disease and was getting daily shots of very potent mind-altering drugs to deal with his pain. And this would, of course, be the third.
And we should note that FDR was in pretty bad shape in ways that that were being kept from the public too, when he ran for his 17th term.
Right.
As well.
That's right. Well, actually, he actually had to go on a tour in October, as my friend Eric Fettman reminded me on Facebook, my former colleague at the New York Post. He actually went on a tour in October of 1944, like a pretty punishing 17-day tour around the Northeast, to show that he was not, in fact, at death's door. And he died 142 days later because he was at death's door. So yeah, I guess that's the fourth. Somebody told the New York Times, that's, I think, the key detail here, is that the news got out. Either they're slow leaking it or somebody is breaking inside the Biden inner circle.
But this story was actually broken by a conservative website first, and the Times took it without attribution. Wasn't it Alex Berenson? I mean, somebody wrote about this.
Was it?
Yeah, I think so.
I thought it was. I thought it was. Oh, was it? I thought it was John Levine at the Post. No.
Oh, okay. Well,
I think it came from the conservative media ecosystem, and the New York Times eventually wrote about it.
But that would, if you're right about that, that would suggest that somebody in the Secret Service or something has broken ranks to let the world know about this. If not,
the records are public. I think this is official visitors' logs. That's why we only know that the specialist visited 8 times between July 2023 and March 2024. We don't actually know. I don't think it's been reported if the neurologist has returned to the White House since March.
And they're claiming he was consulting on a bill.
Right. And then we have the doctor's letter that we should mention that was released by the White House late last night from Dr. Kevin O'Connor, who wrote a 2-page letter to the public beginning, "I wanted to share with you background on why Dr. Kevin Kennard visited the White House." That's the specialist. And then writes another 2 pages of complete gobbledygook. I mean, it's in Times New Roman font, but it might as well be in the doctor's, handwriting, like the way they write prescriptions, because I can't make any sense of what he's writing here. He's saying that this is a very good specialist. He's been a neurology consultant to the White House medical unit since 2012. He comes, he's very valuable. And, the doctor writes, "As I've written in each of the president's medical reports, he sees all these specialists, and Dr. Kennard was the neurological specialist that examined President Biden for each of his annual physicals. And I make these results public." Just earlier this year, he had another one. And then he goes on to say that he has no. Well, so this is what's funny. He goes, Parkinson's in the most recent exam, quote, an extremely detailed neurologic exam was again reassuring in that there were no findings which would be consistent with any cerebellar or other central neurological disorder, such as stroke, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, or ascending lateral sclerosis, nor are there any signs of cervical myelopathy. This exam did support the finding about his problems with his feet. So they're denying that he has Parkinson's, or at least he hasn't been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease as recently as the winter 2024.
It sounds like they're almost denying that he saw Biden on any of those other times, right? I mean, in other words, the letter is basically like, and what they said yesterday is that he comes to the White House medical unit, and this is a sort of routine thing that he comes to the White House.
Well, right. I mean, I think that's why
trying to imply that
he's evading
not right.
Right. Now,
he's obviously seen Biden. I mean,
here's the thing. We
see Biden every day. There's something wrong with the man.
Right. There's a detail that Karine Jean-Pierre let slip. I think it was Karine Jean-Pierre yesterday that I thought was kind of striking, though, of course, not disqualifying, which is that, Biden sees a doctor twice a week. He sees a doctor, comes twice a week. Who sees a doctor twice a week?
I mean, is he Elvis?
I mean, granted, he's got a doctor on stage. There's an entire medical unit inside the White House.
He sees Dr. Joe Biden twice a week.
Well, you know what was
I am fascinated by this because 81-year-old people need to go see doctors and see specialists. That is true. But she made it sound as though, well, it's completely normal. He just sees a doctor twice a week. That would indicate that he is under scrutiny from under medical supervision pretty closely, because if you are in a stable condition, you don't need somebody to come take your pulse and your vitals and your this and your that, or check on whatever.
There's also to the Parkinson disease point. There are all kinds of symptoms that can be called Parkinsonism. There's something called Lewy body dementia that expresses as Parkinson's-like symptoms. So the weird, I think Matt's right to point to the weird details in that letter. It was very evasive. And when Karine Jean-Pierre yesterday, it's the first time she's actually faced a mildly hostile press corps, and she completely melted down, just as Dr. Jill did when some questions were shouted at her yesterday in public. It's really interesting to see this administration finally face pushback, and it's on a very crucial issue, and they are not handling it well. Karine Jean-Pierre did not handle herself well in that press conference, and she didn't answer those questions in a way that was at all reassuring, I think, to the people who wanted reassurance.
I want to say that I don't believe that Biden has Parkinson's. It strikes me that even at this late date, even conspiratorially, even if you think that Jill Biden is like, Lady Macbeth and power hungry and wants to hold on to power, the idea that in 2024 you would try to hide a condition like that from the American people and think you could get away with it through the election without a gigantic crisis emerging after the whatever strikes me as fantastical. So I am skeptical, but what I am not skeptical of is the idea that there is something wrong with him and they're not telling us what it is, and they don't themselves believe that it rises to the level or the condition that makes him unfit to serve. They might even be lying themselves about that. They may be saying to themselves that, people have a lot of things and people go through will have a lot of trouble, and maybe he's got neuropathy in his feet, which is something that can happen that doesn't necessarily have a root cause. It could just be not necessarily the condition of it. He's 81 years old, so maybe that's why he stomps around and walks with that gait. He's this guy who has had surgery twice 30 years ago because to protect himself from possible aneurysm. So, when you muck around inside the brain, that could have long-term consequences neurologically that aren't mental but are physiological. We just don't even know. So,
and John, you mentioned in a past podcast another physical but not sort of neurological exactly symptom, which is that when you get much older, you sort of lose the ability to there's like muscle you just sort of lose the ability to control your jaw and your upper deck and that whole area as well as you used to, and the words can flow together, right? There's like
Yeah.
a physical.
Well, there's the jaw, there's the back of the throat, which there is a soft body, not soft body, soft tissue in the back of the throat that relaxes over time. And again, if you know old people, I know we all think of the old man yells at cloud as the example of old people, but their voices weaken, their articulation can weaken over time. That's just a sign of age. Again, that would not be a sign of infirmity, except if you think that the president should look as hale and hearty as possible if he is going to go up against Putin, who is swimming 6 miles a day in icy water or whatever it is,
and riding without a shirt on the back of a horse. Yeah. But one other point about the doctor, I just want to throw this out there because, again, we saw this criticism of Trump's doctor. We should have Dr. Ronnie, but we should also have this of Dr. O'Connor. He's a Biden family friend, right? He's like explored deals with Biden's brother. He treated him when he was vice president. He wrote all these sort of sycophantic emails to the Bidens. He consulted with Biden's, I think, sister-in-law and something like. He's in the Biden universe, and so there would be zero impulse for him to try to be independent of that universe. He would lose all clout, power, potential, influence.
I mean, I think that one of the most revealing facts of the past week has been Biden's continual refusal to take the cognitive test. And he's been asked several times now to take the cognitive test, and he always evades the question. Stephanopoulos asked him, and he gave this answer that, well, I take the cognitive test every day, which is a dodge. Joe and Mika asked him in his Morning Joe call-in on Monday, the 8th, and he went on a rambling answer where he said that he had been tested for COVID recently. Not the same thing as the cognitive exam. And Jean-Pierre has been similarly evasive. That in itself reveals something. Why won't he take it? All of his friendly pundit friends, E.J. Dionne, David Brooks, Ruth Marcus, they're saying, take the exam. I think Bill Galston too. Just take the exam. He won't do it. That is so damning. And then you have the Wall Street Journal report this morning showing continued additional anecdotes of how his staff has been trying to cover up and accommodate his aging. This is and these anecdotes aren't even recent. They kind of go back a year or two in some cases. This is very bad. You can't have a president in this condition, and everyone's trying to cover it up. And he's now doubling down, thinking that if he yells at MSNBC and challenges people to take him on at the convention and sends this letter to Congress saying it's time to move on, that the problem will be dealt with. The problem won't be dealt with. We only age in one direction. So the next time he has a moment, and he will, all of this is going to come up again.
And look, this week,
and not just that, but they have this. It's the reporting, right? The drip, drip, drip is a thing to genuinely worry about when you're a candidate. The drip, drip, drip of these old stories. The fact is that the story that yesterday, I think Matt's referring to a 2022 story now over 2 years old, when Joe Biden, the Germans at a conference tried to make a dinner early in the evening, or late afternoon, knowing that Biden needed to sleep early, and Biden still couldn't make it. And the Secretary of State showed up and said Biden had to go to sleep. That story we were reading yesterday. We weren't reading it the day after the debate. That's the other thing the Biden campaign has to fear, is that, this is July. In August, those stories of old testimonies are going to come up. And in September and in October, he's going to be dealing with, remember in 2021 when he did this and stuff like that too.
Look, in 2019, he started running for president in April of 2019. And one of the sub-themes of those, were there 20 debates? There were an astonishing number of debates that the Democrats had. And one of the sub-themes was, is Biden going to go up? Is Biden going to show that he doesn't have it to be president anymore because he seems so old. And which was the Castro who actually raised it, like went at him and said, I see you didn't remember that detail there, Mr. Vice President, and was mocked and was derided for being rude and impertinent and was basically driven from the race. But he was articulating something that was a sotto voce theme, and that Biden dealt with by being uncharacteristic throughout that 2019-2020 primary, which was by being terse. The Biden who could never shut up vanished. And he was a guy who had his answer and he would say his answer and then he would be done. And then whoever the moderator was would say, Mr. Vice President, you have 40 seconds left. Is there anything else you want to say? No one had ever seen that Joe Biden before, ever, because Joe Biden is logorrheic and couldn't stop talking. And so clearly what I took away from it, or what naive people took away from it, was that he had found a renewed discipline, that he had taken a long and hard look at how to win this race. He was going to run toward the center, as close to the left while being in the center as he possibly could, so that he could discredit the more left-wing candidates who seemed to have more passionate followers. And he was going to deal with his liability, which is that he couldn't shut up and that he annoyed people because he couldn't shut up and was obnoxious. Now, 5 years later, you got to say that maybe what was going on there was that they were dealing with the Joe Biden that we are now seeing in advanced form today. And it's not as though we have only been talking about the incapacity question really literally for the last year and a half. It's not as though through 21 and 22 that there weren't moments when you went, ooh, it doesn't look good, or that was kind of weird when he did that, or he kind of looked out off into space. He's old. He's 80. He just turned 80, and he looks like an old 80. But you could say to yourself, well, look, this job ages people. Look how old Barack Obama looked after. Look how old George W. Bush looked after 8 years. He came in. He had COVID. He had terrible economy to deal with. Like, he had Afghanistan. He had pressures on him, and so he was it was aging him the way it aged other people. Now, I'm not sure that set of explanations doesn't have to be revised in light of where we are now, that this was you hear people say, Jill Abramson yesterday, I was on Mark Halperin's Two Way, which you can watch almost on a daily basis on YouTube, which is a conversation about what's going on during the day. And Jill Abramson, the former editor of the New York Times, was on, and in the chat, she said, my sources tell me that his degeneration is now really, like, the last 3 months, it's just been, accelerating. And okay, if that's what they want to believe, that's fine. I don't see this as an acceleration. It seems to me to be a complete, just like steady rolling down the hill.
Well, it's been hard to tell because typically he's kept out of the public eye.
Right.
I mean, typically he only has one event a day at most. He goes back to Delaware every Friday and often stays until Tuesday morning.
Yeah.
So we really haven't been exposed to Biden.
Almost 9 months of his presidency he spent in Delaware.
Right.
Just want to say, not that I'm counting, but yes.
Right.
And clearly that has been meant to. And I actually worry about what the stress it's causing him right now.
Right.
Because of the debate, he's been put in a position where he has to be more active. And so he's been bragging in the Scarborough interview yesterday. On Monday, he said, well, I was up until 2 a.m. in the morning the next day, and I've been doing these rallies every day. And that's going to have a cost on him. And eventually the cost will be revealed.
Okay.
Is it going to be at the press conference on Thursday? I don't know. Is it going to be next week? I don't know. But he can't escape it's in a way, it's a very conservative insight, which is that you cannot escape your embodiment, right? We are human beings. And when you have a physical condition, as he does, there is no way you can escape it.
There's another thing, which is that Vladimir Putin yesterday they fired a rocket and blew up a children's hospital in Ukraine. And Matt, from the first day, the morning after the debate, you said, this is very frightening because the entire world watched, not just us, and who knows what lesson they're going to take from this. And we know one of the secret or not, sort of under publicized stories of the last 2 months is yet again, the Ukrainians are showing some real sparks of life in their resistance to the Russians. They're inflicting damage. They're inflicting damage inside Russia. They are taking the war to the Russians in the way that they can. They now have patriots that are protecting them to some degree. And therefore, Putin may have his back against the wall again. They have casualty figures that suggest that more Russians have been killed in the last 2 years than in the entire Marshall conflicts the Russians have been involved with since 1945, including Afghanistan and the the Sino-Soviet war, border war in 1969, and various other things. Like, this is no joke. And is Putin going, okay, well, it's time for me to really, really, really take the gloves off because these guys aren't going to be able to do anything. He's distracted. He's off his, they're having a fight inside about who's going to be the president.
Yeah, I mean, I think Putin already has Biden's number and has had it for some years, which is Biden is been self-deterred by his fear of escalation and by Putin's nuclear threat. So Putin knows whatever he does, Biden is not going to respond with the full force or the full aggressiveness that might make Putin think twice. There are a couple other things that go into this just heinous attack on the Children's Hospital in Kyiv yesterday. One, it's a show of barbarism as the NATO summit begins in Washington, D.C. And two, the UN Security Council announced that it will have an emergency session to respond to the attack on the Children's Hospital. But the rotating presidency of the UN Security Council has now fallen to Russia. Russia will chair the meeting on its own war crime. And there's been a trend, as someone has observed, that whenever Russia has this rotating UN Security Council presidency, it tends to be its most aggressive, worst, evil self. So I think he feels that he's uninhibited institutionally. But it's not just Russia, right? It's also Xi Jinping, who seems to be moving a lot of assets into the South China Sea amidst this ongoing conflict with the Philippines, a U.S. treaty ally. And it's also North Korea, which has been weirdly sending bags filled with garbage over the DMZ into South Korean territory. Earlier last month in June, there were a few instances of North Korean soldiers actually going into the DMZ and South Korea actually having to fire on some of them. It's confusing whether that was like construction workers who just got lost or what. But we know that Kim is feeling very strong. He's had this one-on-one with Putin. There are rumors that North Korean troops might go to Ukraine. And then, of course, there's the Middle East. And we have the tensions between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon. And we also have the Iranian regime, which is trying to pull a fast one once again on the United States by elevating this so-called reformist to the presidency and with the promise of restarting negotiations. So it might not, the attempt to exploit Biden's condition might not actually be an assertion of hard power. It could just be trickery and chicanery in order to loop Biden into appeasing the mullahs, as he's wanted to do throughout his presidency.
Let's take this in two stages, if we could. Okay, first, let's talk about Ukraine and NATO and the NATO summit. Because, of course, by the way, the NATO summit could feature some moment or other where people who are not beholden to the American liberal consensus are in Biden's presence or in his company, and something happens and we hear about it. And that could be one of those moments, particularly for Democrats, as Seth said yesterday, like they really care about America's reputation with the people who are like the people who come in for the NATO summit. And if word is bad, like that is going to be very, very, very alarming to them. But the other thing to talk about is, as I said, the picture with Russia and Ukraine is ambiguous. 3 or 4 months ago, people were getting very pessimistic. There seems to have been a kind of reversal of the pessimism to some extent. And meanwhile, the Republican Party issued the Donald Trump approved platform, such as it is. It is not really a platform. It's a 16-page document with a lot of sentences, different, broken down into very small chunks. Platforms have been, historically like hundreds of pages long with very detailed.
It's the tweet version of a platform.
Right. So, but when we get to the part of the platform that is about international affairs, which takes up 1 page of 16, unless you want to talk about trade, it is a little unnerving because here's what it says at a moment when, once again, Ukraine could really use our help and is showing reasons why we should be giving it more help because it is showing some success. So our commitment, Chapter 10, return to peace through strength. Keeping the American people safe requires a strong America. The Biden administration's weak foreign policy has made us less safe and a laughing stock all over the world. The Republican Party has returned peace through strength, rebuilding our military and alliances, countering China, defeating terrorism, building an Iron Dome missile shield, promoting American values, securing our homeland and borders, and reviving our defense industrial base. There is nothing about Ukraine. There is a line about strengthening the alliances. Republicans will strengthen alliances by ensuring that our allies must meet their obligations to invest in the common defense and by restoring peace to Europe. We will stand with Israel and seek peace in the Middle East. We will rebuild our alliance network in the region to assure a future of peace, stability, and prosperity. So Trump is remaining, or the Republican Party is now going silent on Ukraine, which I guess is better than the Republican Party openly calling for an immediate end to the war. On
the peace in Europe is the tell that it's a referent to Ukraine. And we know that Trump wants to end this war. The question is how. And then the second question is, what will Trump do when he finds he can't end the war because Vladimir Putin does not find it in his interest to do so? So a lot remains unsaid, unstated. I want to talk about the platform, if I can, just for a second, because it is a pretty remarkable document. In 2016, the Republican Party issued a platform. It was 66 pages long. It was the work of a committee. It had sections on really every policy area you can think of. It talked about alliances, human rights, talked about social issues. It talked about education in detail, poverty. This platform is 16 pages long. It is the work of one person. I mean, you read the platform, and especially you read the 20 principles, which are the preface to the platform. And it's obvious Trump wrote the principles, at least, because it's in his style of all caps.
So we say dictate.
He could have punched them out on his phone, or dictate, because they even have the exclamation points that he has.
It's like an 18th century English document, because literally every noun is capitalized. So it's like if you read Lawrence Stern's Tristram Shandy in the original typography, nouns were capitalized.
He's really Samuel Johnson-like, Trump. He's a raconteur. He goes to the coffee shop and he gives the Republican Party its 12 missions. It's 20 missions. I'm sorry. And so it's brief. It's terse, and it leaves a lot out. I mean, that's what's really interesting. This is not a party platforms. Also, if you go back, and I spent some time yesterday going back and reading the original Republican Party platforms, the platform of 1976, which was a very important platform because Reagan was able to insert an entire plank on morality in foreign policy. The 1980 platform, of course, was the Reaganite platform. There's a lot about principles. There's a lot about the Declaration and the Constitution. In the early Republican platforms, of course, about free soil, free labor. I don't have any of that here. You have it's what Trump wants, and it's a partisan kind of map. Here's what we're going to do instead of here's what we're about. And I think that shift, just to conclude, that shift is indicative of how the Republican Party has changed to become the party of Trump.
Also,
but it's very savvy on abortion, though. I mean, we should talk for a minute about how the language about abortion is like. Yes, he promotes birth control, IVF. He takes away some of the more pro-life.
It is the least socially conservative Republican platform since at least the 1960s.
Yes,
I mean, if
definitely.
you just think about, I'm talking about what we thought of as the values voter issues of the past 40 years, which are issues involving sex and gender and the family. It had nothing on that. I mean, it has nothing on that.
Two things that are important about that: the party platform, the platform that comes out of the convention, or is written before the convention. They have debates in the days before. This is the historical pattern. You have 20 committees working on different things. They come together. They have arguments. The platform is adopted. The platform is the way that the party tried to hold the president ideologically accountable for what activists and the people who got him nominated want the presidency to be. So it was kind of a check on the candidate saying, you represent us as well as the people who voted for you. We represent the people who voted for you. This is what you should do, all things being equal, if you have the opportunity to do them in legislation or in executive action and all of that. This is yet another indication of the complete destruction of the party from the inside, because there is no party. There was no one. The party, I imagine, remains a pro-life party. The pro-life movement was basically shut out of any part of the drafting of this, leaving there's a war now inside the pro-life movement. Now, again, maybe there shouldn't be a pro-life movement anymore per se nationally, because Roe v. Wade was overturned. The battles are now in the states. It's not a national issue for the Republican Party, except in as much as people may want, either Democrats want some kind of national legislation authorizing abortion from Congress, or Republicans want some kind of national heartbeat bill or something like that. But you could make the case that this is beyond the goal of the pro-life movement was achieved. Roe v. Wade was overturned. Now the fight is somewhere else. That having been said, when Ralph Reed says, I guess this is okay, and Tony Perkins says, no, it's not okay, that's when you know that the movement that has been the spine of the social conservative element of the United States is now irretrievably been pushed. This basically history has supplanted it.
It's a sign of something else also, which is that Trump is there are these vestiges of party organization that Trump has learned to use that still can offer benefit, but are far from necessary. They're like the appendix. It's like Trump has figured out how to use the appendix, and now he's got another organ that other people don't have in their body. Like the conventions you're not going to get rid of the conventions because they're hugely useful to a candidate. This is why, I'm always saying how much I hate the State of the Union being a speech, and everybody says, well, nobody's going to be the first president to not use that plenum, to not use that speech. And it's the same thing with the convention. And it's also similar with, I think, the party platform. There's nothing really necessary in today's day and age about the party platform. It only seems to be causing candidates headaches because they have to explain it and defend it or distance themselves from it or whatever. And of course, there was the great moment when the Democrats argued very publicly over whether we should put God and Jerusalem back in the party platform. It was voted down 1,000,000,000 to 1, but it was declared victorious. That whole scene we've
That
gone
was
over
2012, right? In
that was
Philadelphia.
2012. But that was there are sometimes it really sort of blows up and nobody knows what to do. Villagrosa was on stage at the time. He had this look on his face like a deer in the headlights because you're not used to having public fights over something that doesn't seem to have that kind of impact. Trump has learned to use. Trump has said, it's just sitting there. So why don't I make it a Trumpy thing?
We need to
make
point
one.
out what. Yeah, go ahead.
I will make one point about the platform, which I think is funny. It's a sign that, social conservatives, the values voters, have been like the base of the Republican Party since the late 70s, really the 1980 campaign with the moral majority extending through the values voters in 2004. And even 2016, you saw the strength of white evangelical voters who were very leery of Trump at first, but then, of course, got behind him after he secured the nomination. They're invisible in this document. Their concerns, their historic concerns, are sure there's verbiage there saying, and it's somewhat contradictory. They say that the 14th Amendment applies to all life, which would imply that there's actually no issue here. It's a constitutional fact that unborn life should be protected. But then it also leaves it to the states. It says it supports IVF. It's I don't know whether the language is specific about the abortion pill in the platform, but the readings of the platform say that the Republican Party is not going to try to regulate abortifacients as they travel across straight lines. Marriage, the same-sex marriage issue. This is one issue, by the way, where Republicans have become more conservative, according to Gallup data, in recent years. But that's not really in there. Trans is there. Very interestingly enough, it's there to say no men in women's sports, which is politically the most saleable of the trans dimension. But it doesn't go into, none of this goes into detail. And what this says to me is two things. One, if Trump is elected, and I've had this thought for a while, it will be with the Republican coalition unlike any in my lifetime. It will be with vast minority support. It will be
relatively vast. I mean,
right. Well, comparative. Yeah, comparative. Yeah. Right. Comparative. Right. Comparatively, it will be the non-college educated, which we've seen over the past several cycles, but which will dominate, and it will be more Trumpian. It won't have the social conservatism as part of its party identity. There may well be social conservatives who will come to power with Trump and who will try to enact social conservative policies, but the identity of the party is no longer a values voter identity. It is America first. We're going to have the largest deportation in history. We're going to have the trade deals that protect American industry, and we're going to look out for our interests above everyone else's. And then just one second point about platform, which I've been kind of amused to observe. What was the big argument from the new right with the rise of Trump in 2016? It was, oh, you conservative establishment, you neocons and libertarians, you took over the party, you hijacked our party, and all you care about are free markets and wars.
Starting wars, yes.
Yeah, and you've never given the social conservatives their due. And some of our friends and former colleagues even went out even more on a limb to say the real identity of the Republican Party or the conservative movement should be embracing a theistic worldview, but also applying that worldview in concrete terms in the political sphere by really kind of introducing not just religion in the public square, but public religion, right? And these same people now are totally on board with Trump's platform. And so to watch them say, oh, well, look, this is just the reality of politics here, that Trump has to take this new stance on abortion. He has to take this stance on the abortion pill. We're not talking about trans, because that's just not the right way to win elections. At least I get that satisfaction of watching them turn this way.
What is really striking to me is, again, that we have a transformed candidate in Trump in this sense, which is that he is not looking to polarize this election. He is looking to depolarize the election because he understands that he has a chance to grab the middle. That is new. That is new. It wasn't how he did 2020. It certainly wasn't how he tried to do 2022 with his candidates in the states. And we just saw for 3 weeks ago, or 2 weeks, I don't even remember when, the Democratic Party trying to figure out how to come up with its line of attack against the right in this election, because the Supreme Court final decisions were peculiarly contradictory and very hard to line up ideologically, as Dobbs, handed them this, nuclear bomb that they could use, right? So you had, on the one hand, Trump, an idea that the president had partial immunity. That seemed to be some expansion of executive power. And on the other hand, you had the end of Chevron deference, which meant effectively that executive agencies were being disempowered and that Congress was now being newly empowered. And you could make a through line, which is Trump's 3 conservative judges came in and are instituting a tyrannical right-wing state, because part of what they were doing was saying the presidency is too strong, or the executive branch is too strong. You go and do your job, Congress. If you want things to happen in a regulatory fashion at the, in the agencies, you tell them what to do. That's your job, not we over empowered agencies to effectively make laws. And now Trump has come in and said, you're not running at me on abortion. I mean, you could try. Just go ahead and try. You know what else the Supreme Court did? It let stand liberal exceptions to abortion at the state level in a couple of state cases. And this is
someone should ask Trump what Chevron deference means.
I mean,
but I think but that's really the point, though, isn't it? Which is that this is not what he didn't appoint these justices because he was hoping that Chevron deference would get thrown out the window. He's appointed these justices because he was putting together a coalition to win an election. And this list of judges and doing the court this in particular direction was a key part of him winning the election. And this year, a key part of him winning the election is not touting those judges. And Trump is able to just cut things loose. This is a very Trump thing. And that's also the same thing with some of the trans stuff because of the woke. Trump ran at DeSantis as though DeSantis was going overboard with anti-woke stuff, right? Trump said, I don't care about Disney anymore. I don't care about this anymore. Trump tends to do things like he'll pick a culture war fight, he'll win the fight, and then he moves on while the Republican Party behind him tries to sketch out, some sort of national platform around that issue.
He won the culture war within the Republican Party in this sense. That is, he has now got those people in his camp, and he is now doing what successful candidates do, which is what we talked about on this podcast from 2017 onward, which is he is trying to expand out his base, not narrow it. And his impulse as president for the first 3 years or even 4 years was to weirdly narrow his base. And suddenly he's now being a conventional politician by saying, okay, I gave you what you wanted. You owe me. I gave you your 3 justices. They took Roe v. Wade. I now got to go talk to these people over there. So I'm now going for the workers with the tariffs, like doubling down, tripling down on the tariffs and on the border, which is something I didn't really get to or in the right. I mean, I'm happy with what I did, but I didn't do enough. Now I'm going to do more. And you come with me and I'm going to grow myself bigger and try to reach out to minorities and all of that.
That's also part of his distancing from the Project 2025, the Heritage Foundation-led organizational effort to pre-staff a second Trump administration and also to come up with a phone book length agenda for the next administration. Trump, over the July 4th weekend, issued a Truth Social statement saying, I don't even know what this is. I have nothing to do with it. I'm the person who's in charge here, not this Heritage Foundation group. And I think it speaks to what you're saying, John, that he no longer feels that he has to transact with the conservative movement. He needed to do that, per Seth's point, in 2016. And even throughout his presidency, he needed to keep that part of his coalition happy. He is a transactional figure. Now, though, he realizes that he is the party. And he's now writing the platform for the party. It's not a consensus document. It's an individual document. It's a reflection of a personality. This is what I think is so, as a pseudo-intellectual, I like ideas and I like principles. And I have always kind of approached politics through the lens of principles and how do we apply those principles to public policy or to analyzing current events. Well, Trump is not like that. Trump actually doesn't have many principles. He has some gut instincts and some views about the way the world works, mainly that it's a zero-sum world and you're either a winner or you're a loser. But this party platform now reflects his view. There's no real principle here other than America first, which is, it's a slogan. And it's funny to watch so many Republican politicians and ambitious figures on the right just get in line.
And one more thing, and then we should move on to Israel. But Christine, I'm struck by the fact that, he goes very heavily into tariffs. That is basically his economic policy is tariffs. Now, we don't have time today, and we could do 6 months on why this is a disastrous thing and the history of tariffs and how awful they are. But there's another political aspect to this, which is that Biden also embraced tariffs to some extent. Biden's industrial policy in the United States, as expressed in the CHIPS Act, involves many of the theories that are undergirding Trump's approach in this document, whatever you might call it, which is we need to bring production back here. We need to employ people here, not worry about this, not worry about that. And I think that would undercut in a second Trump administration Democratic efforts to argue against his policy preferences, because they all voted for a protectionist bill in 2022. And
more importantly, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are now in an active fight for the American workers' vote. And that is new. That used to be something, and you see it now with the rhetoric Biden is using. He assumes, the unions are with me because I care about the American worker. But a lot of American workers don't feel like the Democratic Party has their interest in mind anymore. And this is, again, why another hobby horse of ours on the podcast, but it's why the student loan debt transfer still matters to voters, and why the other little piece in there that Trump put in there is the not taxing tips. That's another that is another very savvy political move, because that's not a huge number of people, but it is the people whose votes are kind of up for grabs now, because the Democratic Party has become an elite, highly educated coastal party whose interests do not align with the average American worker's interests. They just don't. The educational divide is now a chasm, and the values divide because of that educational difference is also a chasm. And Lunch Pail Joe can keep saying the same things, but the more I think the other thing that helps Trump with this platform, it's weirdly sort of positive. It's not as, doom and gloom. You've got Dark Brandon holing up in the White House, refusing to budge, surrounded by a shrinking number of courtiers. And then there's Trump going, oh, yeah, okay, it's okay with IVF, and we're going to make the country good again. And, it's not an entirely positive message, not Reagan's, Morning in America, but it is a more positive tone than what we're seeing from Biden right now. Biden's angry in a lot of his appearances. He's wound up.
That is very interesting. Now, just to move on to Israel, because Trump says we will support Israel and bring peace to the Middle East. So again, we have no idea what that means. Trump says we should let Israel finish the job. We're now in a highly complicated situation in relation to the Hamas, Israel, Gaza, Hezbollah, American, Qatari, Egyptian, Lebanese, Iranian negotiation over what's going on in the war in Gaza and with Lebanon. And Seth, you wrote a very good post yesterday reflecting the irony that Hamas seems to be saying uncle, that it's cornered. The corridor between Rafah and Egypt, the Philadelphia corridor, a road, now is in Israel's possession. All of Gaza is, relatively speaking, secured by Israel. Not that there aren't Hamas fighters who are popping up and shooting people. And Hamas itself, the fighters, seem to now be trapped in tunnels in a corner of Rafah. And Hamas started saying, okay, look, how about a ceasefire? We'll let some hostages out. Give us 6 weeks. And this was the proposal, I don't know, a month ago, that Tony Blinken kept going back and forth and getting no's from Sinwar and from Hamas. And then 2 days ago, supposedly Hamas is like, all right, look, we'll do this 6 week ceasefire. We're not going to say that that's the end of the war. We're not going to make Israel agree that in phase 2 of this 3-phase process that the war must end. But and so suddenly there's a breakthrough, and everyone says there's a breakthrough. And you think, and I think, and a bunch of people think, but not necessarily the Israeli public, that when your enemy is crying uncle, you go in for the kill, because if your goal is to eliminate them, not to leave them standing, you got to eliminate them. And they're basically sending out every signal that says, you actually are probably pretty close to eliminating us. Maybe we can buy ourselves some time and regroup. Where do you think this stands? Because supposedly last night, the optimism that was being expressed about the breakthrough suddenly became a lot less optimistic. I'm not quite sure why, but because we don't know why they got optimistic in the first place.
Well, they in 1967, when Israeli military folks were arguing or debating over strategy, I believe it was Ariel Sharon who said, look, somebody suggested taking Gaza, and Ariel Sharon, I believe it was, who said, you don't actually have to take Gaza, just cut it off as you go into Egypt, the rest of Egypt, and Gaza will just wither on the vine. You don't actually have to, you could just cut it off and it will die. And that's sort of what Israel's policy has been in the current war, which is, if you can stop Hamas in Gaza from rearming and resupplying and having a way to move fighters in and out, either to get medical attention, to recruit more fighters, whatever it is, smuggling, all that stuff. If you can cut them off from Egypt, it dies on the vine. Hamas will die on the vine. It's just about cutting off its oxygen supply. And so I think part of the turn in the optimism has been that Israelis, these polls show lately, Israelis, if they had to choose between a hostage deal or the continuation of the war to the definitive defeat and eradication of Hamas, they choose a hostage deal. And I think what's happening here is that a lot of Israelis are starting to think that Hamas is now in sort of hospice, that you don't actually have to smother Sinwar's face with a pillow if you can stop the ability of Hamas to recover. And so I think a lot of Israelis think that you can have both, because we basically have that one now. We've sort of guaranteed Hamas with that. And I don't know that this is correct, but I'm saying a general part of that polling response is coming from people who think that Hamas is as good as dead, and therefore bring the hostages home. That's a growing opinion among the Israeli public.
Right. And the danger of this view is that as good as dead isn't dead. And there's a kind of brilliant debate on this on Dan Senor's Call Me Back podcast released yesterday between Haviv Redig-Gur and Nadav Eyal. And Nadav saying, look, here's the thing. 67% of Israelis want a hostage deal. And, you can't really kill Hamas anyway. And so, and meanwhile, this is also good because it'll collapse Bibi's government, which I really want. And so, that it's going to happen, and it's going to happen. And Haviv Redig-Gur says the goal of this war was to eliminate Hamas. If Hamas is not eliminated, Israel loses the war. And if you think that you're going to deter Hezbollah by letting Hamas survive, the opposite is the case. If you want deterrence in Lebanon, you better make it clear that you are willing to go fight to the last man to win this battle in the south in order to save Israel's north from the rocketry of the group that is really basically just an extension of the Iranian army, sitting in southern Lebanon. So
as Miracle Max said, there's a big difference between mostly dead and all dead.
Right. And so mostly dead. And they're not, so now Hamas says they didn't say that Hamas spokesman says they never said that they would agree to a circumstance in which Israel didn't have to didn't have to say the war was over. So, as is always the case with has been always the case with these conversations, the notion that Hamas's cleverness, Hamas is playing Israel like a fiddle, except when it comes down to it, they have a different understanding of what they're doing. And one of the things that they're doing is they're trying to make clear to the Arabs that they'll fight to the last man, not just that Israel needs to kill off every last one of them, but that if they will be humiliated if they don't keep this fight going forever. So, but we have a really interesting circumstance, which is this was a real focus of the Biden administration, like the focus of the Biden administration in policy terms. And then the debate happened, and now, I don't know, they're in, they're out, Burns is going, Blinken's going, nobody cares, because nobody cares. And this is the one benefit of Biden's, the crisis in Biden's senescence, which is that America has played too large a role, is too involved, is too central focused on trying to do something here. And Israel and Egypt are having a serious negotiation over a pretty weird but interesting sounding deterrent feature, which is that they want to drop a wall into the ground. If there can be tunnels 250 meters deep, they can dig a hole and make a wall 250 meters deep between Gaza and Egypt, that not only they're closing off the tunnels, and then they'll actually make it so that there's nothing for that, or make it harder for them to break through to make new tunnels. That's like
Israel has started to do this in other places, but not nearly that deep, right? They've started a bit on the border to test this theory.
Right. But that's like a practical solution to a practical problem, not like a piece of paper where it's like, okay, you promise you're not going to let them resupply. And it's like they're going to have problems getting anything underground from Israel into Rafah. And if that happens, then they're really dead. Then they will just choke off the oxygen and die because they won't have any munitions left.
Right.
Okay.
This is something that I think we also have to maybe reassess with the Biden stuff, which is that you mentioned earlier about the foreign officials, and there might be in this NATO summit people who are more sympathetic to Putin, and they may leak things that happen. But I think that's all about the public knowing. My sense is not is no longer Putin watched the debate. It's more along the lines of the popular theory that Truman didn't know about that the U.S. had the bomb before Stalin did. And when he told Stalin, Stalin had to pretend that he didn't already know this, which is that I think that these foreign meetings I think it's been clear to these officials for a very long time. If the Germans went through this in 2022, Putin has known this as long as, the Germans have known it and whatever. And I think that around the world, there's also this sense
Biden's
that
incapacity.
the Biden's incapacity, right? And that instead of something having changed, that, it's the public has figured it out. America has learned what the rest of the world knew in a way, but that Biden has been at these foreign gatherings and it's been clear to the world. And I think that part of the scrambling is also that, which is that, maybe they'll change now. Maybe they'll push Biden out. Maybe, the thing that's changing now is the American public's reaction to something the world has known and been using as its basis to plan its foreign policy all along.
Okay, so I'm going to take droit de seigneur and do the commentary recommends, but I think maybe everybody will. I'm going nerdy and very lowbrow because I want to praise the Sunday night episode of House of the Dragon, the sequel to Game of Thrones.
I haven't watched it yet.
Yeah, I haven't watched it yet either.
I am not going to spoil it.
No spoilers. Okay.
Good. Thank you.
But here's the thing.
There will be incest, I assume. There's always incest.
There were 8 bad episodes that ended Game of Thrones, right? I think it was 8. A couple of them were okay, whatever. But, everybody very disappointed by the last season of Game of Thrones. And then all rational people, I think, were disappointed by the first season of House of the Dragon. But if you took so much pleasure from the first 6 seasons of Game of Thrones, and Matt wrote very brilliantly both about the show and about the book series, you kept going, just hoping that maybe something would be infused. And all I can say is that this episode, which I think is episode 4? Is it episode 4?
Yeah, it's 4.
Okay. Is the first one out of the 8 plus 10 or 8 plus the 3 preceding ones that really evokes the best of Game of Thrones, not only in its scope, the magnificence of how it looks, but you're actually starting to get a sense of who these characters are, why you should care about them. Their relations are extremely complex and interesting in the way that the relations between the characters on Game of Thrones got increasingly complex. And I am suddenly now, like Donald Trump, perhaps, over the last couple of days, I have renewed optimism that the amount of time that I have wasted on bad Game of Thrones material, something has turned around, and that
no sunk cost fallacy. Okay.
Right, which really is really good and really surprising, and has some really dazzling acting.
I'm happy to hear that, John, because I recall the text message you sent me many years ago after you finished the 5th book in the series.
Yes.
And I believe you texted me saying, I wasted X number of hours reading all these 5 books.
All your fault, Matt.
Yeah, you totally blame me.
And
it ended the 5th book ends in basically with Dany Targaryen starting off where she began.
Yeah.
The TV show filled in the gap, obviously, in its final seasons. But I'm just happy to hear that you have a renewed sense of joy in the world.
I blame George R.R. Martin because, and this is why
you blamed me.
I'm pretty sure
why there never was another book. This is why there never was another book.
Well, George R.R. Martin wasn't on the podcast to be blamed. Matt,
that's right.
You were.
That's right.
So.
Well, we were.
Yeah, this is long before the podcast.
Long before the podcast. But I do think it is interesting that the 5th book was basically an admission of
defeat. Yes.
Of defeat. And what's more, I don't even blame him.
No.
I don't blame him. He set up an impossibly complex world.
Yes.
And could not figure out how to land the plane after 5,000 pages. And the only weird thing about George R.R. Martin was the lying. The fact that he kept saying, "Oh, the book is coming out next. I'm almost done."
Right.
I'm really, it's coming.
Yeah, he stopped that now. He's kind of abandoned that.
Now he's I was the watchmaker and I just let it run.
Fascinating because it was like if he said, I've told as much of the story as I can. You know what? I'm actually letting Benioff and Weiss finish it, or I'm going to hire another, or somebody else is going to come in and figure out a conclusion to the story, because I've worked my magic and I can't get to the winter.
Okay, I have a question.
I can't get to the winter.
This episode you're endorsing, it's a very important question for me, because I will only watch the show which has dragons in the title if the dragons do more than just act like.
Okay, so this is what I wanted to say. This is what I want to say, because this is what I want to say.
This will give me the dragons I want.
No, I would just tell you that one thing that stands out about this episode, maybe in the first time for either series, they have made the dragons extraordinarily interesting.
Thank you. Okay, then I will watch.
That's all I'm going to say. But I've
been
been complaining for a very long time that the dragons are not interesting. That as a stand-in for nukes, they're just a red button, and they're not in.
And something.
All I will say is that I was overjoyed that they were so interesting.
Okay, that's a good endorsement. I will watch.
Yes. And a disrecommends. I'm just going to add, just to close out, a disrecommends, which is The Boys, which is a series that I have very much enjoyed, and is a sick joke of a show about superheroes and Marvel and, corporations and things like that. The last episode of The Boys, which came out on Thursday, is one of the most sheerly disgusting things I have ever seen. I mean, it is vile. It is, if you have teenagers, don't let them watch it if you can avoid it. It is, or anyone younger, it is very close to being pornographic, and it is and the nihilism and the degradation. I'm not even now talking about how it's now basically it's all about the right and Trump and stuff like that in a way that's really not interesting at all. But this is just, they're now just doubling down on the sexual perversity stuff, and it's really gross. So The Boys gets a big thumbs down. House of the Dragon gets a big thumbs up. We'll be back tomorrow. For Matt, Seth, and Christine, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.